Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Hinkle. I chair the Post Commission. Let me call this meeting to order, and let me begin with a roll call vote of the commissioners in attendance. I will do this in alphabetical order as I do each roll call vote. Commissioner Bluestone.
I'm here.
Commissioner Calderon.
Present. Good morning, all.
Commissioner Sherry.
Here.
Commissioner Ellison, I believe is, I'll go back to him in just a minute.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Kajirosian.
Here, good morning. Here, good morning.
Commissioner Luma.
Present, good morning.
Commissioner West.
Here, good morning.
And Commissioner Wynn.
Here. Good morning.
We obviously have a quorum. We have every commissioner in attendance. And I think with that, let me welcome members of the public who are in attendance. And let me move to our agenda. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our June 8th and June 21st meetings. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second.
I'll second.
Are there any questions or comments about either of those sets of minutes? There being no indication of that, let me call for a vote. Commissioner Bluestone. Approved. Commissioner Calderon.
Approve.
Commissioner Sherry.
Approved.
Commissioner Ellison, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Kajirosian.
Approved.
Commissioner Luma.
Approved.
Commissioner West.
Approved.
Commissioner Wynn.
Yes.
And I also approve. So both sets of minutes are unanimously approved. Let me thank Annie Lee for her efforts in putting those minutes together and all others who worked on the minutes. I think with that, let me move to the executive director report, please. Enrique.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I will be sharing my screen momentarily, just to walk through, like I have done in the past, PowerPoint that summarizes some of the activities since our last meeting, especially in the area of recertification, which has been a big task for all the staff in recent days, but in recent weeks and months as well. In the packet, in the commissioner's packet, there is a more detailed memo that is essentially behind, or that this presentation summarizes. And again, of course, we'll take any questions from commissioners at any point. So if you give me a second, let me share my screen and turn to that PowerPoint. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, I see some heads nodding. As I reported to you last, we met on June 30th, the date of our last meeting. We were on track at that time to recertify some, 6,500 submissions of individuals that had submitted information to Post. I'm glad to report, commissioners, that on July 1st, the day after, when all of these certifications expired, statutory certifications expired, we successfully sent 6,309 individual letters to the appropriate agencies. Just to give you a little context into what went on that day, we had tested the functionality, I should mention, in days before, and had spent a fair amount of time thinking about the business rules that we would apply to all the information that would be submitted, the algorithms in the tool, etc. We tested that functionality a week prior with the communities of Woburn and Milford, that happened to be two mid-size agencies that had a couple of different examples, and that had gone fairly well. But you never really know how the tool is going to go with the scale that we anticipated until we actually do it. And again, I'm very happy to report that all those letters went out. I should mention that the team was troubleshooting in real time that July 1. I'll give you an example of what one of those instances in which we had to reconcile, and that is the example I have in the screen. 18 officers, for example, had 2 assignments or work in 2 different agencies part-time and had 2 attestations. And that was okay, except for in these cases, there was a different question or a different answer to those questions. So the system was surfacing that as a validation error. So the point is that we were really, the team was working very hard up until the day of to make sure that all of those notices went out and went out successfully. As I've reported to you in the past, prior to that deadline, we only had essentially about 15 days to focus on accepting and processing those submissions, because our deadline had been June 15, and we were here sending all of those notices on July 1, all of which was the result of the tight deadlines that we had to begin with. But again, very happy to report that we distribute all these notices successfully. What happened, as I've mentioned or highlighted in the past, every person who logs into our portal, and there's 2 or 3 people generally by agency, would had access to a packet that included all of these certification letters. And all of those letters were distributed by those agencies to those officers, and they are also placing a copy in the officers' personnel files. Just to recap also what went on, I had reported last time we met that there was at least 1 agency that had not submitted, but I'm happy to report that everybody that we believe is in scope has either submitted or requested an extension prior to June 30th. And again, also something very important in terms of achieving an important milestone. I think this number that I have in the screen, 13 agencies pending submission, is now dated, because we just saw the state police submit their packet yesterday. So I believe now that that number to be 12. That number, commissioners might remember, was about 21 last time we met, and that means that agencies are now submitting, those that requested an extension and have until July 15 have started to submit those packets as we had asked them. The next deadline for them is July 15, and of course we'll pay very close attention to ensure that those agencies submit that information to post. I also wanted to mention a few things relative to validation efforts. We thought a lot about validating the data that we were going to receive. It's a very large data set, and we wanted to make sure that there were no answers that would be very hard for us to aggregate, and there were up-down answers to many of the questions. Either it's a yes or a no, etc. But of course, it's hard to validate things like the misspelling of an officer's name, or if somebody transposed the month and the date of a date of birth, or in rare occasions, providing a wrong answer. So some of the activities that the certification team has been very busy since July 1 is looking and mining for these type of exceptions. I don't want to give you the impression that it's many, but given the large data set, there are some of those, and we are making those corrections. An important thing to notice is also that we're learning about some of these because of feedback we get from the agencies and the individuals themselves. If they see their own, let's say, name misspelled, they're telling us of those instances, and we have to correct them. I should mention that one of there's different ways in which we ensure that we have a unique officer and that is date of birth, including a name, first name and middle initial, so that similar names are not ambiguated, as they say, or that we can do disambiguation is the right term. In either case, the certification team is also addressing process questions, what happens next, and I'll be talking a little bit about it today, and I discuss some of those details in the memo that's included in the packet. And one of the intentions of sending that memo or including that memo in the packet today is also to take language directly from there to put in our website and instruct agencies how we are dealing with those with certain exceptions. So as of this morning, there are approximately 740 individuals that are currently conditionally certified. There's, of course, about 5,800 individuals that have been certified, and we can be, as I've reported before, are reasonably assured and highly confident that they have met all the requirements of the statute. But now we turn our attention to these 740 individuals that, again, this number is going to fluctuate depending on additional submissions and some of the processes that we're doing here to ensure compliance with those requirements. The majority of those individuals fall in what we call technical exceptions. Many of those, but not all, require attention in the next 90 days. And this is, of course, something that is going to keep the team very busy as to how we're going to update all of that, all of those requirements, make sure that those requirements are met and we're satisfied that they have been met. Because, of course, at this point, we don't know that they have been met. The largest one, or the one that has a lot of individuals in this category, is relative to basic training. And that applies to a lot of part-time officers or reserve officers that never went to the academy and were given an opportunity as part of this process in police reform to attend the Bridge Academy. And the Bridge Academy has, depending on the situation of the officer, has a different work requirement. But because we asked this question in one question with the ability to tell us about those exceptions in the comments field, we are seeing that there's enough data validation that we need to do in this regard. And we're in constant conversations recently with the MPTC, as we have been in the past, to make sure that the officers that were attending the the Bridge Academy and maybe didn't complete it, that we address them in some way. But again, a lot of the exceptions of these conditionally certified individuals fall in this category relative to basic training and those work requirements. A greater minority of the officers in this category also may have never had a national or a state background check and have to complete it, or may not have a CPR certificate, or have not completed an oral interview. For each of these cases, or if you have one or more of these cases, each individual has, again, the next 90 days to comply with those requirements. So as I mentioned, the team is busy making sure that we accept those updates to those requirements in a structured way, not on a one-off basis, which would make the process really resource intensive. And we're going to provide guidance very soon as to how to get these updates. I should mention here, by the way, if there was not the completion of an oral interview, that includes people who did not answer the questionnaire and those that now need to do so do not have to answer questions 6 and 7. So let me expound a little bit more on the basic training or the Breach Academy. Oops, I'm sorry. Our regulations, when it comes to the Breach Academy, reference or state a reference date to complete the Breach Academy. For all kinds of reasons, including capacity, the MPTC announced, since police reform was passed, that officers that needed to attend the Breach Academy had never gone to basic training could only do so at certain times prior to the deadline. And the last time that they had, the last date that they had to sign up was April 29 of 2022. They had many opportunities, by the way, to sign up before then. There were multiple instances of the Breach Academy that was offered to these officers. They only accepted officers A through H because, again, there's capacity concerns. There's they can only host so many people at the same time. They now, for example, turn their attention to the next third of the alphabet of officers to do the Breach Academy. But the idea of this, or the rationale behind this April 29 date is that at 200 hours or so, that it requires, that the Breach Academy is required, that people are required to go through for the Breach Academy, excuse me. And 40 hours a week, you have about, 5 or 6 weeks in which you can complete the academy. And therefore, the better part of May and half of June meant that people were completing this requirement right up until the deadline. So we now know that a number of officers, not a large number, but enough number of officers never signed up or were attending the bridge at the time that the agency submitted the information to post. And of those officers, some were that were attending were either later dismissed or withdrew from the Breach Academy. Something that is not uncommon in the MPTC world, but something that is very relevant to what we have right now in our hands, because some of those officers may have received a conditional certification, and the reality is that they will no longer be able to complete that standard. So as such, we are looking at each of these cases. We will likely issue a correction letter in the coming days to make sure that that the record is correct. This is some of the conversations that we have. We have a meeting with the MPTC actually on Thursday to go through each of these cases, corroborate that we've exchanged the data like we anticipated or like we intended, and we have the right information and can change the certification status of officers that may have been conditionally certified or in a very few cases certified, and we need to change that. There's also, I mentioned earlier, a work requirement that accompanies the Breach Academy, and it depends, it varies, or it's different if the individual is a special state police officer, or sometimes referred to as an SSPO, or if the person is a reserve officer working in a police department. Those attending the Breach Academy are required to complete 2,400 hours of work experience, but for full-time SSPOs, the work requirement has to be completed by December 31st of 2022. By the way, most of the SSPOs are individuals assigned to colleges, the colleges and universities that have a police department, or the hospitals that also have a police unit. part-time officers, including some SSPOs, but every other part-time officer, the work requirement is allowed by the MPTC to be completed by January 1 of 2027. And that comes directly from the fact that these many work hours, if you're a part-time officer, there's logistically not enough. Well, you need to consider that they only work those part-time hours. So all of these individuals have essentially received a notice that they have a conditional certification for 90 days, but we will correct and clarify the situation that, depending on the situation, that extends further given their work requirement status. So those, as is articulated just above, those SSPOs that are completing their work requirement, that needs to be completed by December of this year, and those part-time officers by January 1st of 2027. Let me also mention a couple of other recertification efforts. There were a number of people, again, not many, but these are some of the exceptions that we're seeing in a large data set. If an officer is on a leave of absence, there was instances in which the head of the agency attested to them, even if they're on a leave of absence, and they have been conditionally certified. If they completed a questionnaire or met all the other requirements, all of those requirements also show up in their conditional certification. But also, as in before, they have been labeled as some of those requirements need to be met within the next 90 days. Or within 90 days after they return to service. And that's, which is what the regulations stipulate. So we are also communicating with agencies and will offer guidance that for those individuals on a leave of absence, the agency must notify post of their return to service when they do, and that they will have 90 days to complete all those requirements after they return to service. Even if their conditional certification currently says that they have 90 days to complete it, it also says, or as determined by post. So again, we're offering this guidance because these exceptions surface out of the different statuses that people fall under. I'll say one more thing about briefly about individuals that may not have received a notification, and we're working on making sure that that's the case. We have a number of people, again, not a large set. My last count was about 60 people, as I reported to you, 60 individuals that may have, that may merit, and do merit a further review by post. If there is no attestation from the chief, and this is the majority of that small number, as I mentioned, post is conducting the additional necessary review. It is likely that the officer has not yet received a notice from post, but will soon be receiving that. And the officer is conditionally certified, as our regulations allow, during this period, this 90-day period, or until such time as post has completed the review. And I highlight or underline these because as these, first of all, our regulations provide for, and this is, and we want to make sure that that we do the review that is necessary, and we're not bound necessarily by the 90 days, given resource constraints in other areas. So we'll have to look at the reasons for that lack of attestation. As commissioners might remember, the regulations provide that the officer has an opportunity to provide a written statement, after they have seen those reasons. And we're already seeing questions and a little bit of communication relative to officers adequately being given notice, or not. And this is again something that we want to make sure we follow. This begins to be now the real work of the Division of Standards. And again, the good news is that there's this is a very small subset, but requires careful analysis, and therefore we are taking the necessary time. I also want to give you another example of things that we're looking at, these other exceptions. And this is a very, very small number. Again, I don't want to give you the impression that this happened broadly, but if there's a pending disciplinary matter, the person is on leave and there's no attestation, we're also looking at it carefully. We have been getting disciplinary records about this, with everybody really. And so we're cross-referencing that information with other information we have. There were literally, 4 possible matches with the National Decertification Index. And we want to ensure that it's not a name that is, duplicate, that it's essentially the person that is in fact there. And we are, again, doing that due diligence to ensure that that's the case. That actually concludes my certification update. If commissioners don't mind, I'll turn to a little bit of an administrative update. We welcome actually today Deputy General Counsel Veronica Lightfoot. I'm not sure if she's a panelist, but I'm pretty sure she's seeing this meeting. I was wondering if our General Counsel, Randy Ravitz, wants to say briefly a little bit about Veronica. We're very happy that she is on board.
Enrique, could I just interrupt? I'm sorry. Could you take your screen down so we can see the people again? I apologize.
Yes, no, good idea, Commissioner. Thank you. Let me do that now. I actually see that she's on. She is. Thank you for that observation, Commissioner. Randy, do you want to say a little something about Veronica?
Yes, I'm very pleased to say that that we are introducing Deputy General Counsel Veronica King Lightfoot today. Veronica earned her bachelor's degree and her law degree from the University of Alabama. She then gained considerable experience in government law and private law as a clerk for 2 Alabama Supreme Court justices and an attorney for the city of Dallas, an Alabama law firm, the Alabama Department of Revenue, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, the Georgia Law Department, and the Fulton County Attorney in Georgia. And then in February 2018, she became an Assistant Attorney General in the Constitutional and Administrative Law Division of the Government Bureau within the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. And there she represented Massachusetts agencies and officials in various types of litigation for almost 4.5 years. And that is in fact the same division that has been representing the Post Commission in civil litigation. Veronica is a recipient of the Elliott Richardson Public Service Award from the Massachusetts Attorney General and the Ida B. Wells Award from the Massachusetts Black Women Attorneys. And just yesterday, Veronica was honored by the governor and the lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth in a ceremony for her work in representing the Commonwealth in COVID-related matters and helping the Commonwealth get through those matters, get through the pandemic. So there you will see she appears with, of course, the governor and the attorney general, and is holding a citation that she received, which recognizes her exceptional efforts in support of emergency measures adopted during the COVID-19 pandemic to protect the health and well-being of the people of the Commonwealth, as well as her expert advocacy, which ensured that state government had the necessary authority to take immediate, effective, and measured action to respond to an unprecedented public health emergency and preserve the law as a resource for protecting the common good. So that's one more reason why we are delighted and honored to be joined by Veronica on the team.
Thank you, Randy. And again,
Welcome aboard. I just have to say, welcome aboard.
Yeah,
So
welcome.
impressive. We're so happy
Congratulations
to have
and
you.
welcome.
Welcome. Glad to have you.
thank you. And again, it's great to have you, Veronica. We're also delighted to have Ali Trahan. She's our finance and budget manager. She also doubles the department, like Veronica doubling the department, the legal department. She doubles the finance department as she joins us in very important work that she's going to help us do relative to managing our budget, our finances, etc. Eric, do you want to say a word about Ali?
Yes, of course. Ali comes to us with a load of experience. She's an MBA from UMass Boston. She got her start in state government finance over at the impenetrable House Ways and Means Committee, which is where a lot of finance folks get their start, whether in the Senate or the House. So we're very lucky to have her with that type of experience. Also, what's really nice is that she spent some time at the comptroller's office, which is really no small deal, especially considering that as finance people, we deal with the comptroller's office on a daily basis. So she did a lot of training over there as well. And then, of course, she spent the last 4 years in two roles, chief budget as a budget director and chief budget officer at the massive Department of Conservation and Recreation, otherwise known as DCR, which is a $100 million organization. So she comes to us with a great host of experience, and we're very, very happy to have her here with us.
Welcome to you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Yes, it's really happy to have Ali. Eric mentioned this, but let me just emphasize. We will likely get an audit from the state auditor and the comptrollers, in the next couple of years. Let's see how much runway they give us. And it's critical, I would say, to have people like Ali help us out, ensure that we're doing all our finances and our back office operations the way that we're supposed to. So welcome, Ali. We have two more members of the team joining us next week. I'll introduce them the next time we speak, and we will we also continue some of the technology efforts, technology recruitment efforts. We continue to get a lot of help from the Office of Technology Services of the Commonwealth, and those were the people that were mostly at the helm of helping us implement this solution, the solution that I keep referencing as the portal. But that support is going to wane down, and we have to continue to make efforts to have those that expertise in-house. So I'll pause there with my report, Madam Chair, and can take any questions as commissioners might have them.
Let me just thank you for that report, the very comprehensive report, Enrique. Let me also, you use the term team as you talked about the recertification efforts, and let me commend all members of that team. Last meeting, Commissioner Bluestone also thanked those who in law enforcement who have been part of this recertification process, and we thank them as well. So with that, are there any questions from the commissioners as to anything that our executive director has mentioned in his report? I don't think I see anything on.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I see Commissioner Ellison raised his hand in the function.
Yes, I'm sorry, and Commissioner West and Bluestone as well, I think. So Commissioner Ellison, first, please.
Thank you. Enrique, I just had a quick question on the remaining number that I think you said around 60 that there was some, I say issues, but questions about certification. How many of them would you say are going to require, if at all, immediate attention by the commission?
Commissioner, that's That's a great question that I'm unfortunately not able to answer at this time. Let me mention that it's probably a subset, but I cannot tell you just how many. As per our regulations, we anticipated that the initial review happens by the staff level, and it also allows the executive director to have that review. And we'll continue to do that, which is why I, for one, also turn my attention to that now. But
So go ahead. I'm sorry. I just had a
yeah,
follow up.
sorry. But as part of that review, what immediately follows is bringing that case, if you will, to the commission. And so we're working towards developing that process and figuring out just how many of those individuals fall in that category.
So the follow up is, what is the function of those individuals? Are they not certified? Are they still able to operate in their function as law enforcement, or is that temporarily halted?
No, they're conditionally certified, and regulations speak to their being conditionally certified until that review is concluded. But I want to distinguish that from the technical exceptions that I spoke about before, the 700, that it's a very straightforward thing to complete. This merits a careful review and analysis, and that's where we are right now. So it could take conceivably more than 90 days, frankly, but those individuals will remain conditionally certified for the duration of that time. I should also mention, Commissioner, that some of these individuals are, not all, but some are on an administrative leave. It's sometimes a paid or unpaid leave because they have a pending matter. And in all likelihood, that will probably drive that time frame that you're asking as to if it's an administrative, if it's a pending matter, a disciplinary matter that is already undergoing review by the local agency, we'll observe and continue to get reports on to figure out what the process is afterwards.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Bluestone. Excuse me, Commissioner Bluestone, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just wanted to congratulate the thousands of officers that seamlessly moved through this process and are certified. I think that's a fabulous outcome and speaks to just the quality of law enforcement officers that we have across the Commonwealth. I had the privilege of going to a decertification training yesterday that was led by Officer Charles DeChiara. And obviously, this was for supervising officers. And obviously, the concern is around these individuals who are conditionally recertified, or I believe at our last meeting, there were 7 individuals that had not achieved certification. And so my question just on the behalf of those officers is, can you sort of speak a little bit more about the individuals who did not achieve certification?
Yes, thank you, commissioners. And I'll turn to Randy in a minute, who might help me with just speaking general as to the recourse that they have, because the regulations also speak to that. That doesn't mean that they're done. They can, ask for a review, etc. But those individuals that I reported to, Commissioner, and by the way, that number is going to grow based on what I talked about in the Breach Academy, are mostly people who are not in a position to complete the Breach Academy. That opportunity has passed, and the reality is that they have not met that standard, the standard of completing the basic training. The larger subset were individuals who were, reserve officers, never went to training, where the statute requires them to all be trained, and the policy that EOPS and the MPTC came with, and we agreed with, was that the remedy for that was attending the Breach Academy. The MPTC sent this message quite a bit, a number of times, saying you must sign up, you must sign up. And again, a lot of people did and completed the Bridge Academy, and they are now certified, by the way, or are in the process of getting that conditional certification. But those few officers that never signed up or attended and withdrew, as I explained in my earlier remarks, will not be able to meet that standard. I don't know that there are any desire by the MPTC to allow officers who missed all of that process to sign up, let's say, for the Bridge Academy of the next year or the following year, because the way they set it up was for capacity concerns. They don't have unlimited seats at these trainings. That you could only attend the Bridge Academy that corresponded to the year where your certification was set to expire. But this would be something that the MPTC would have to weigh in if they ever wanted to, or if there was ever an appetite to let officers who never completed that training, our A through H, be able to join, let's say, the academies that start actually already. Does that answer your question, Madam Commissioner?
I think so. So it sounds like you're saying that these individuals are primarily people who were not able to complete that bridge training.
That's correct.
And I'm wondering, is that something that we're all comfortable with?
Well, let me just interject at this point that I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed in a different way. So I'm going to cut that discussion at the moment. I think, unless Commissioner Bluestone, you had another question. I believe Commissioner West had her hand in the air originally.
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Bluestone, anything further?
No, thank you.
Any other commissioners, any questions of anything that Enrique addressed? I think we should also thank the MPTC for their efforts in working with us on these recertification issues that Enrique has addressed. Once again, thank you, members of the team. If there are no further questions from commissioners, let me move on to the next item in our agenda, which is the fiscal year 23 budget. And I turn to our Chief Financial Officer, Eric Rebello-Pradas, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. We had presented some numbers during our last meeting. This is just be a brief recap of that, as we're expecting you to vote on the FY23 budget today. So, if you just bear with me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, everyone should see that, all those numbers. We good? Okay. All right, so just beginning, I'm just going to touch upon, just going to present a high-level summary first. Then I'm just going to touch upon FY22, and then we'll do a very brief review of FY23. In this high-level summary here, just looking at the FY22 line, about a third of the way down the page, we started the year with $4.9 million. As I had reported a couple of weeks ago, these are the same numbers, so no difference here. We're looking to probably have a total expenditures of $2.2 million for the entire fiscal year. And much of this, of course, is because of a rolling payroll, starting out with just a few employees, and now we're up to about, as the end of this reporting, we ended with about 14 employees. We're now up to about 16 employees. So I'd say we're still on par to finish the fiscal year at $2.2 million. We're now in the accounts payable period for July and August as we finish paying some bills for the FY22 fiscal year. That'll leave us with a positive balance of $2.66 million, which, as we had explained repeatedly, that's we're going to use for one-time costs for our technical solution, our IT solution, which is sales force. We are assuming or we have been estimating all along that cost would probably be somewhere around $2 to $2.5 million in one-time expenses. So we're going to ask the legislature to pack forward or balance forward that amount into FY23. As you know, for FY23, we already were on par to receive $5 million, which was the allocation that was enumerated in the governor's budget that was filed. So the House and Senate have concurred in that. Even though we don't have a final budget yet, still in conference committee, we do believe that $5 million will hold. So the $5 million plus the $2.66 million that will roll over from FY22, that'll give us a total of $7.66 million for FY23. We right now are estimating expenditures very conservatively at around $7.8 million, give or take. That gives us a balance of, it's in the negative, but it is slight. It's just under 2%. Nothing certainly to be concerned about. And I actually call that out in the memo that's included in your packet and give a little more detail there about that particular number. That number is very fluid. It can move just based on delaying certain hires or having any sort of change in payroll or any of our other expenses could easily absorb that type of a balance. Just moving on to here we go. Okay, so if we just look at this particular chart here, FY22, I had shown this before. I'm just going to point you to the final column in FY22. If you go all the way down to the bottom where it says grand total, you'll see the 2.66 million. Again, that's the positive balance that we're asking the governor and the legislature to roll over into FY23. Going right to FY23 in the blue column, you'll notice that there are two numbers that stick out prominently. The first one, of course, is payroll, 3.3 million, 99% of agencies, that usually is the highest expense. And then the other high expense that you see there is for IT, all the way at the bottom. It's also 3.3 million for information technology. I'm just going to go through a few items on the employee payroll. Expand on that right here. So here's a breakout of the payroll for 2 fiscal years. We'll focus obviously on FY22. Obviously the budget for the 9 commissioners up top, the existing 14 employees as of the end of June 30th. We just onboarded 2 more, which would be included in the forecasted employees, which you see there, which is 12. So that gives us a subtotal of about $3.3 million for our strict payroll. That's and when I say strict payroll, I mean FTEs or full-time equivalent employees. We also are predicting to have 2 contractors. They also could be full-time employees. They might be contractors. We don't know yet because they are of a technical nature. The 2 that we have there is our for our product manager and for our systems administrator or solutions architect is another way to put that. So that's the number that you see there. And that gives a grand total of all of our payroll of about $3.6 million. The reason that number is a bit high, obviously in the green, is because it includes the contractors, which again are not part of strict payroll. So the number in the dark blue, 3 lines up, the 3.297, meshes more with what you'll see on the previous chart for payroll. The only difference being that the number on the chart also includes 4.5% allowance for cost of living adjustment, which I also explain in further detail in the memo. Just more of a visual on the staff chart for FY23. So by the end of FY23, June 30th, 2023, we're looking at about 27 positions. The dark blue represents those that are already filled. Again, this is from the end of June 30th, so that's why 2 of the light colored items should be dark blue, but I wanted to make sure that we were using consistently the same numbers that I used at the end of June for this particular budget. Okay, and let me just go back up to this particular chart here. So the other item I wanted to point out, going all the way to the bottom, this here, the information technology, that 3.3 million that you see there, again, the majority of that 2.66 million is going to be rolled up into the Salesforce procurement, the one-time expenses. And we're thinking that that is going to be in mostly, of course, in maintenance. It's going to be in maintenance costs, but mostly it's going to be in those one-time service and labor costs. So that's the majority that you see there. And then there's probably another $500,000 or $600,000 that we'll have in typical IT costs that we'll see throughout the fiscal year. That includes certainly cell phones and other services, IT services that we would have to maintain, not to maintain payroll, but to maintain chargeback costs, which is costs that we pay to TSS, which is technical services, secretariat, basically for email and for use of certain features such as HRCMS, which is our payroll, and of course MARS, which is our accounting system. Madam Chair, just one other thing I wanted to mention as well. In FY24, that budget we will start putting together in October. So even though you'll be voting on FY23 today, starting in October, in a few months, we will start the development for FY24 budget, which I do think will have considerable changes from what we're looking at now in FY23 as the agency grows and comes into its own. I think in FY24, especially when we put the development together, what a lot of folks don't know is that even though the governor's office is usually files their budget in January, and that usually starts the official budget cycle for the fiscal year. But keep in mind that there's months of preparation and development that goes into that beforehand. And that's what we're going to start in October. With a new administration coming next year, being sworn in next year in January, it looks like we will, they usually haven't, they are given by the Constitution an extra month to file their budget. So we'll see the new administration's budget filed sometime in February of 2023. Madam Chair, that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation and for all your hard work. I see Commissioner Luma with her hand in the air, and there may be other commissioners who have questions. Commissioner Luma, please.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question about the balance forward. When can we expect approval around that, or what's the process for that? And are there any considerations should it not be approved?
Yes, of course. So we the first step in going with that type of approval is to A&F, which we had done several months ago. Actually, it was before my time coming on board in March. It was already presented as a situation to A&F. So they've been tracking out on what they call a sub-tracker. Anytime they file a supplemental budget, they always have a whole list of things that people ask for, various agencies ask for it, and they consider those before they put their next supplemental budget out there. The final deficiency budget, which is the final supplemental budget of the fiscal year, in this case FY22, is usually filed sometime in July, August. With this administration, they've been doing it around the summertime. The legislature usually takes it up around September, sometimes October. The comptroller gets nervous about that. It should really be taken up by before October 31st, because that's the official closing of the fiscal year. Once it's in the governor's budget, when they file that, which we're assuming will be in the next several weeks, it'll then go to the legislature. Once the governor files it, we'll reach out to the two Ways and Means committees to make sure that they understand what that money is for. In our case, we actually have already done that. Even though most agencies don't reach out until after the budget is filed, we actually did so already to give them a heads up that this is something we're going to be looking for. But of course, the first step is to get it in the governor's budget. If ultimately it is not passed, there are other things that we can do where we are given signals right now. All the lights look green. Everyone seems to be on board with the situation. They know that our Salesforce considerations are going to be expensive with IT, and this just only makes sense and reasonable that we would carry this money over. If we didn't, though, we probably would have to look into some sort of supplemental expenditure for FY23 or basically asking for additional monies. But right now we're getting pretty much a thumbs up all around. And again, that starts with A&F, and they've assured us that everything looks good. Of course, I don't believe anything until I see it in writing. So once it's filed, I'll feel a lot better about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Don't think I see any other hand in the air. Is there a motion to approve the fiscal year 23 budget?
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Any other questions or comments? Don't think I see any hands in the air. Let me call for a vote, please. Commissioner Bluestone. Commissioner Bluestone, please.
I was muted. I would vote no.
Commissioner Calderon,
I approve.
Commissioner Sherry,
Yes.
Commissioner Ellison,
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
and I also approve. So with that, the motion is carried by a 8-1 vote. And again, thank you very much, Eric, and those who have worked with you on the budget. Let me now turn to the next item on our agenda, which is the proposed post policy on dissemination of information concerning law enforcement officers. And I turn now to our general counsel, Ravitz, with regard to a comment on that, please.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. We are not at this time asking the commission to approve any particular policy. Rather, we're framing an issue that we've begun to see more and more, and identifying some of the complexities and challenges associated with it as a way of furthering the discussion of how we might approach things. So the issue is developing some sort of guidelines regarding the dissemination of information on law enforcement officers, because we've begun to receive a number of public records requests seeking information that the commission has collected as part of its certification process or in connection with disciplinary matters. And that raises a lot of, as I say, complexities and challenges. And so it calls for a lot of thought about how to approach things. So let me just identify the types of information that could be sought, some of which we're already getting requests for, and some of which we might get requests for. Within certification records, there are the responses to certification questionnaires, agency assessments of character and fitness, other information provided by agencies regarding how officers satisfied the different criteria for certification, and then our own analyses of qualifications. And then within disciplinary records, you have the initial records that were supplied by agencies, then materials that are associated with pending disciplinary matters, and then records that we may assemble for referral to another office for civil or criminal enforcement. And all of these present their own challenges. In particular, there are certain categories of information, and I think sometimes this is overlooked in discussions of the public records law. There are certain categories of information in which disclosure is not only not required, but it's actually prohibited. And sometimes there are real consequences to disclosing certain types of information. The Secretary of the Commonwealth in a guide offered a list of 66 examples within this category, and those are just examples. But one is found within our own statute. And that provides that all proceedings and records relating to a preliminary inquiry or an initial staff review used to determine whether to initiate an inquiry shall be confidential. And there's only a limited exception for when we're referring things to prosecutors. But courts and agencies that have confronted what appeared to be the model that language is based on, a provision of the State Ethics Commission, they've been strong in enforcing it. And then with other provisions, not only do they prohibit disclosure of information, but they even provide for civil liability or even criminal liability or other consequences where that information is disseminated. So for example, certain types of personal contact information for public employees, certain criminal record information, certain victim information, and certain personal data that's not within a public record and that's not already covered by the Corey laws. If those are disseminated improperly, there could be civil, even criminal consequences. Then there is other information that is not prohibited from dissemination, but its disclosure is not required. The statutory definition of public records includes 21 different exemptions. So there are a lot of categories there. And some examples of ones that might be relevant to us include exemptions for personally private information other than records of law enforcement misconduct information, investigation. And there's legislative history suggesting that exception for law enforcement misconduct investigations was intended to apply only where the investigation is complete. Policy development materials, there's an exemption for that. Investigatory materials, there's an exemption for that. And they all have different parameters and their own complexities, but you could see how the types of information that I identified at the beginning could fall into one or more of those categories. Then there's some other reasons to be careful about releasing information that falls within these categories where we're not required to release it, but we're not required to withhold it. One is that if we make the wrong call on that, then we could face exposure to liability. If we think it can be disseminated and we get that wrong, we could be facing that exposure. Another reason is that these exemptions that are built into the public records law are there for sound policy reasons. And so it's the underlying reasons why they're there that would militate in favor of being careful before the information is released. So for example, not disrupting an ongoing investigation. Then there are practical considerations that I'll talk about in a moment. And then we can look to the legislature, look for the cues that we've received from them about their preferences and the rational balancing approach that they adopted within our own statute to handling information regarding law enforcement officers, and we can take our cues from them. So regarding the practical considerations, we collect information from hundreds of other agencies and individuals, and they differ in format. Agencies differ in their approaches of how they're structured. They differ in their approaches of whether they release certain information. Other people are affected by or may have an interest in whether information is released. It might affect them personally. Some categories of records involve thousands of officers and thousands of lines of text. Redacting that information would be very burdensome. Producing records would be potentially expensive for the requester. A lot of the information that we're dealing with is still being processed. We're still building our structure, our procedures, our databases, and we still face challenging deadlines and demands. And so resources would be diverted from other areas to respond to these. Now, I mentioned the cues that we've gotten from the legislature, and the legislature has signaled to us certain preferences and also appears to have developed a balanced approach to the dissemination of law enforcement information that we could keep in mind as we make decisions ourselves. Specifically, the legislature provided in Chapter 6E that certain information regarding individual officers is to be made available to the public, but they channeled the public to electronic databases for us to develop. And they provided for certain limited information to be included in those databases, but that other information need not be included. And they suggested certain information perhaps should not be included in those databases. And they entrusted the commission to draw the lines. So we see that in the provisions regarding the certification databases. In Section 4 of our statute, the legislature required the creation of 2 databases. One of them doesn't need to be publicly accessible. And as to that one, the legislature provided that 13 different categories of information, some with subcategories, needed to be included. But then turning to the second database that does need to be publicly accessible, they didn't provide any specification regarding the types of records that need to be included. And they said that the commission needs to consider the health and safety of the officers in promulgating, in developing its databases. And as I say, it entrusted the commission to basically draw the lines there. We also see that in the provisions regarding disciplinary information databases. Here too, the legislature required the creation of 2 databases, one that does not have to be publicly accessible, that has to include various types of information, and another that does need to be publicly accessible, that is expected to include a more limited scope of information, and they entrusted the commission to decide whether to add other forms. So taking into account the balancing that we see in the public records laws generally, which make agency records public by default, but then provide all those different exemptions and a series of different prohibitions, some of which with consequences, and the balancing that we see in our own statute through the database provisions. One approach is simply to develop a set of guidelines that are consistent with those balancing approaches that we see in those other areas of law, and that provide some general directions and identify some provisions that are likely to apply to different categories of records, while doing everything we can to channel the public to the commission databases, while at the same time recognizing that the result may differ for different documents based on their content. We can't necessarily make predictions about all documents in a certain category going forward, and also leaving open the possibility of different approaches being taken in responding to other types of requests, like requests in discovery or in particular circumstances, like certain criminal matters, for example, and taking into account the feedback that we receive from stakeholders on this issue in the same way that the commission has been doing with all the areas under its charge. So those are just some thoughts about how this complex area can be addressed, and we look forward to discussing the matter more and developing some guidelines and some protocols that would take into account all the types of things that I've mentioned.
And thank you for this very comprehensive explanation, Randy. Are there any questions at this point from any of my fellow commissioners on what? Commissioner Luma, do you have your hand in the air? Oh, sorry, I apologize. So I don't, yes, Enrique, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just gonna underscore something that General Counsel Ravitz said at the beginning, which is that this presentation is trying to set up the stage for what we hope to come back to you with a proposed policy in the near future. The idea is that we're getting a lot of questions, but there's many considerations, as he just outlined, that we need to be very careful about. And so this is a topic that begins today, but is by no means done.
Thank you. And I think with that, move on. There are no matters that were not anticipated at the time of posting. So I would at this time, unless I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second to that motion, please?
Second.
Thank you. Let me do a roll call vote. Commissioner Bluestone,
Approve.
Commissioner Calderon,
Yes.
Commissioner Sherry,
I approve.
Commissioner Ellison,
Yes, and thank everyone for their assistance.
Commissioner Kazarosian,
Yes.
Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
And I also approve. The motion is unanimously carried. Members of the public, thank you very much for your attendance. Staff and commissioners, thank you very much. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.